Thanks, Glenn. Hey, everybody, I'm Clif Gooding. I'm a grateful alcoholic. I'm sober since August the 15th of 2001, and for that short amount of time, I'm as grateful as I know how to be. And I want to thank Glenn for reaching out and asking me to be here today. I haven't done much Zoom stuff in the last couple of years just because calendar's full of other things, and but there's not many people that I would come do a Zoom deal for, but Glenn was certainly one of those people, and it was during the day, and that worked out perfect for me. So thanks, Glenn, for having me here today, and welcome to the folks that are new to this meeting. And if you're new or you're nearly new to Alcoholics Anonymous, let me welcome you, because if you're new, you're nearly new, we have good news and bad news. The good news is the people here are your new best friends. The bad news is the people here are your new best friends. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you've made it this far, we have nobody to refer you down to. You're just here with us. And so we're glad to have you here, and hope you find what a lot of us have found in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's always good to see my buddy Wayne here. Wayne and I were together last March or April, and just had a great 3 or 4 days together, and it was wonderful. And I got to see Deb last week, and so it's always good to see her again. And just some folks on here I love dearly, and it's good to be part of that. Wayne told me, he said, you can talk about whatever you want, which is a dangerous thing to say to an alcoholic. It's a good thing he didn't say as long as you want, which is always a dangerous combination. So what I'd like to do is just spend a little time and try just to have a conversation today and just talk a little bit, and really more anxious to hear what you all have to say, and leave a little time for some fellowship and sharing on your side, not just hear from me. I always feel like it's a better day for me if I get to hear some solution from other people and not just me espouse my experience. So I could tell you one story about my alcoholism, and it would sum up. You wouldn't really have to hear anything else about me to know that I actually belong here. When I was 27, they sent me to treatment for the first time, and I spent 30 days out in Arizona at a treatment center. I was 27 years old, and of course I was not alcoholic, and there were some people that believed I had a drinking problem. But I certainly didn't believe that, and I certainly didn't believe that that was the problem that took me to Arizona. But I don't want you good people to think that I didn't recognize I had some sort of problem. And it seemed to me in the summer of 2000, or the summer of 1988, when I went to treatment, what I had was a back problem. Everybody seemed to be on mine, and if I went to treatment, I could get them off. And so I did that with the opportunity to get them off my back. And I went to Arizona, and I spent 30 days at the treatment center there, came home. When I came home, I had just been divorced from my second ex-wife, and it was a really bad deal. She got the neighbors and I got the house, which is never a good combination. And I remember that afternoon after I got home on a Sunday, I was out in my yard, and my neighbor to the west of me had a couple little boys. One was 8 or 9. And one of them was 5. And the little 5-year-old was out in the front yard, and he wandered over and he said, "Hey, Cliff, where have you been?" And how do you tell a 5-year-old you've been to treatment? You just can't really, they can't piece all that together. So I told him, I said, "Well, I've just been away." And he looked at me with the straightest face ever. He says, "Oh, my mom said you're probably in jail." And so, that story in itself tells you everything you need to know about the kind of life I lived, about my drinking, and about everything about that. And what I can tell you is that when I got out of that treatment center and came home, they told me to go to AA, and that's what I did. I went to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I didn't do nothing else. They didn't say I had to do these other things that we tell people when they come to AA, like you need to get a sponsor, you need to take the action in the book, you need to read the book, you need to work with other people. They just said you need to go to AA, and that's what I did. When I was younger and in college and growing up, I had people that I ran around with, friends of mine. And on the holidays when we drank, they looked a lot like me. They would go out and they would we'd stay out for 4 or 5 days at a time and wander back in. And those people, at some point in time, they met him, they met her, they got these great jobs, and they just stopped. They just stopped drinking. And the crazy thing about those people, when they stopped drinking, their lives got better. They got great jobs. They got promotions at work. They bought houses. They started having kids, bought bigger houses, got better jobs. And objectively, from the outside, their life got better. And in the summer of 1988, when I came home from treatment, I just came to AA and sat around and didn't change anything about my life. I just didn't drink for a period of time. But it didn't change anything else. I continued to lie, cheat, steal, didn't do anything else. I occupied a chair in AA. And what I discovered in that period of time, which I was to later discover in the summer of 2001, is that I'm not like my friends. That when I stop drinking, and that's all I do, my life does not get better. It gets appreciably worse. You know, what I don't know is that I suffer from this malady, restless, irritable, and discontentedness. It seems like all my life I've been trying to get somewhere. Now, I don't know where I'm going, but in the moment or wherever I am does not seem to be a good place to be. I am highly discontented person. I'm unhappy, I'm unsatisfied, I'm dissatisfied, particularly with my current circumstances. And all my life, it seems that I've been chasing something. If I can just get here, if I can just get this, if I can somehow change the external circumstances of my life, somehow I'll be better. And I don't know where that kind of information comes from. I mean, nobody ever said that to me. That was never conveyed to me. You know, I love what our friend Larcene, the great member of the Al-Anon family group, says. She says, you know, information floats through the universe, lands on my head, and I begin to take action on it like it's the truth. And I just take action that if I get a certain point, if I can gather up enough toys, somehow I'm going to be happy. And I can tell you that those things that our textbook talks about that I continue to try to cling to end up being some of the worst things that ever happened to me. But I sat in AA and just got worse. And eventually I left and started drinking again. And that would be the story of my life. I mean, that's the story of my alcoholism. You know, I'll stop, but I always start again. I don't know. I suffer from this spiritual malady, that restless, irritable discontentedness. I don't know that once I take a drink, this phenomenon of craving that Dr. Silkworth talks about takes over. And I can tell you, I'm just out to have a couple, but I'm either going to have two. I can't tell you if I'm going to have 2 or 22. I don't know what's going to happen to me. And the worst part about that is that the fact that I can't drink, because once I start, I can't stop, is that I can't not drink. That I can look into the eyes of people that I love the most and tell them, I swear to God, I'll never do this again. And within days, moments, or hours, I'm drinking again. So this whole 3-piece set, which I'm clueless about, this spiritual, physical, and mental piece, I have no clue about that. In the summer of 2001, when I got displaced from my home one more time by what Lori, who is what she likes to describe as my 4th and final wife, she likes to describe it as she kicked me out of the house in the summer of 2001 for the second time. And that within like 45 days. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous on August the 15th in 01, and I sat down here. And I don't think really many of us really know the date that we were going to get sober. I mean, I certainly didn't go to my calendar and think this is just as good a date as any. You know, I think I'd have been just as well to throw a dart at the calendar, because when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous on August the 15th, 01, I had no intention of getting sober that day. I came to AA with a newcomer plan that I was just going to come to AA, get her calmed down. And then when she settled down, I'm going to go back to doing what I want to do, live the life that I want to live, and really the life that alcoholism tells me I have to live. With no thought about her or anything else, I just wanted to get back to where I was going. And I'm sitting in that AA meeting, and you know, I had this thought come to me with about 5 minutes left that if you don't do something different today, you're going to die. And it's a thought that I hung on to. And what happened for me was a guy had been catching me for 45 days that I've been going to AA. The first time I got kicked out, June 30th of that summer. And I'd gone to AA with the thought I'm doing the same thing. going to try to get better, and then she'll settle down, and I can do what I want to do. And I just wasn't successful at that. And that old man caught me after that meeting, and he began to talk to me about Alcoholics Anonymous in a way that I had never been capable of hearing it before. I'd been to AA, been to treatment, but I'm a firm believer for me that until whiskey had administered me a sufficient beating, as our textbook talks about being beaten into a state of reasonableness, until that had happened for me, I was unable to hear the music of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could hear it, but I didn't really hear it. I could listen to it, but I couldn't hear it. It was like Charlie Brown's People, just womp, 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 womp. And on that day, I was desperate enough. The old man talked to me about just what our textbook talks about, what he was like, what had happened, and what he was like today, as a direct result of the actions out of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I began a journey with him through that book and through the steps. And, he began to spoon feed me Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got me in the book and in the steps. And, what happened for me is that I did exactly what our book talks about in the forward. The first forward to the first edition is that I recovered from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And, from that moment till this day, I have done that. I have remained recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I was giving a talk one day, and I left out the seemingly part, and a lady caught me afterwards, and she pointed to that in the book. And I have to remember, because, when I get here, that's what it appears to me. It appears to me that it's just an absolute hopeless condition, that I'm no way out. As a matter of fact, what Dr. Silkworth talked about, that the alcoholic life had become the only normal one. But the truth is, for people who are new or you're nearly new, that book talks about this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. That idea that I can't drink because every time I do, I can't stop, and I can't not drink. Every time I promise the people I'll never do this again, I end up doing it again. And so he got me in that, and I recovered from that. In step 4, it talks about when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten up mentally and physically. We recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And that's happened for me. And the trick for all that, I think, for a guy like me is, through a process of the steps, what has happened for me is the greatest promise that our 12 steps talk about, is that having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. And somewhere along the way, that began to happen for me. I began to become awake in Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I became awake in Alcoholics Anonymous, I began to become aware of things. And what I've discovered here is, if you come here and you get awake and you become aware of things, you can't become unaware of them. And when I become aware of them, then there's actions that I have to do to ensure I don't return to the person I was before. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about today. I really want to talk about 10, 11, and 12. I want to talk about a guy like me that came to Alcoholics Anonymous, that did 1 through 9, and would give you lip service. If you told me, do you pray and meditate? I would say absolutely. And it was an absolute lie. I mean, I would pray, but I wouldn't meditate, because I have an old idea. I have a fixed idea about meditation. Howard P., one of the great meditators of Alcoholics Anonymous, used to tell the story of that he saw a film when he was a child in Kansas of the training of elephants. And he talked about that when they were captured for circuses or carnivals or whatever, that the trainer would tie a heavy rope around the baby elephant's leg and tie it to a big tree. And so the baby elephant would pull and pull and pull. And finally, the baby elephant surrendered to the thought and to the idea that when the rope gets tight, I can't get loose. And from that, you see today, if you ever go to a circus or a county fair or wherever, the elephants, just a stake in the ground with a rope on them, and they can run all around that stake. But once it gets tight, they stop. And it's not the stake that holds them. It's not the rope that holds them. it's that preformed idea that when the rope gets tight, I can't go anywhere. And that's what tethers them and holds them to the stake. It's not that they couldn't just take off running and obviously run away, but they're limited, that limited idea of that when the rope gets tight, I can't go anywhere. It's what holds the elephant in place. And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, as Howard used to like to say, with a lot of baby elephant ideas. And when I was a kid growing up, and some of the folks here that are more my age than some of the others here, there was an old show in the 60s, early 70s called Kung Fu with David Carradine. And David Carradine was a Kung Fu master. And he lived in this place with his master that taught him Kung Fu. And in that show, they would meditate, and they would light a candle, get in a dark place, get in the lotus position on a pillow, and they would meditate. And I'm kind of a tree stump. I don't fold that way. And so I have a fixed idea that that's meditation. And so I can't do that, so I just don't do it. And so if you ask me about prayer and meditation, I would say, oh yeah, I do that. But I just lie. I'm just a liar in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I don't want you to know that I don't do that. You know, I've got to look good here. And I don't know about you, but in my book, there's no chart in anywhere in that book that says at this point in your sobriety, you should be here spiritually. I mean, it just doesn't exist in my book. And maybe it's in yours, but I haven't published that in my book yet. And what I know is that along our paths, all of our paths, particularly for me, is I just am where I am along this spiritual journey. And when I'm ready to be honest about where I am on that journey, then the whole world and possibilities in God's world opens up for me. And one day I finally got honest with somebody and said, you know, well, they asked me the direct question about my meditative practices. And I had that moment of clarity, much like probably many of you had, in terms of just being honest about my drinking or being honest about some of my defects of character. I had that moment of clarity where I thought, you know, I just got to tell the truth, and told them, you know, here's the real truth, is that I just don't meditate. And I told them what I believe meditation was. And they said, well, that certainly is meditation, but it's not the only kind of meditation. And they directed me to something called contemplative meditation. And of course, as many of you know, there's all kind of forms of meditation, awareness meditation. It does, you know, I'm also one of those guys that's kind of like a BB bouncing around up there. I just get distracted easily. So I believe that I can't meditate, yet that's part of the process, is the BB bouncing around, recognizing that and bringing it back. And so what happened for me is that I began just a really small 5 minutes a day. And I can tell you that if you're a person like me that says, you know, I don't meditate because I can't, you know, 5 minutes a day is 500% more than I was doing. And I just took that really small piece. And what the 12-on-12 talks about is, you know, it looks at this idea of self-examination and prayer meditation combined for this unshakable foundation. And 10-11 give that to me today. You know, I've discovered that I can't live on steps 1 through 9. And I've discovered people that I've sponsored that have come to me and they want to do multiple inventories, which I'm always happy to do. But I really say to them, you know, I'm happy to do this for you, but I believe if we can turn your focus to steps 10 and 11, where you become active in your own recovery, that you become active in your own spiritual growth, that you become active in your conscious contact, that if you do that, that this unshakable foundation that the 12-on-12 talks about can happen for you. And what I discovered is that when I really begin a practice of step 10, of doing the things that it calls for, to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear, when I really do watch for those things, because I can become judgmental, which is just a piece of fear for me. If I really break it down, all of those things react or result as a piece of fear inside of me. What will you think of me? How will I be perceived by you? Are they better than me? All those things that I put through all that dis-ease that I have, that restless, irritable, discontented, that low-grade humanity that I have, that when I hook it into my alcoholism and I allow it to take over, even for a moment, it causes me disturbance. And what our literature talks to us about, at least for me, is that when I'm disturbed, it ain't you. It's never you. The problem is never you. The problem is always me. And so I begin to do this ardent practice of really beginning to watch for those things in my life. And when they begin to crop up, I begin to take notice of where I was on my spiritual journey. That as I moved through the day, that I could find myself being fearful, that I could find myself, being dishonest, not necessarily with you, but with my own self. And in those moments were where I need to immediately turn that to God and ask for help. And when I began to doing that and doing what the rest of that step 10 talks about, when I get those things, I immediately turn to God, that I ask they be removed, that I share that with somebody else, that if I've really screwed up and if I've allowed my instincts to run wild and I've harmed somebody, if I've allowed my defects to get out and I've harmed somebody, then I can make amends to them. But the overall important thing is, regardless of whether I've hurt somebody or not, once I go to God and share that with somebody, I've got to resolutely turn my thoughts to somebody else. That means I got to pick up the phone, call somebody and ask them about their day. And when I spend time in the morning in conscious prayer and meditation, when I spend time reading spiritual literature and contemplating about that, what I've discovered for me is throughout the course of my day, I'm able to catch those things a lot quicker. That my mind, as Howard used to like to talk about, my neural pathways, which I don't even know what that means, but my neural pathways have been redesigned to where I'm aware and I begin to catch these problems in my daily life quicker so I can go to God with them. And I'm going to tell you something, since I've been doing that, what's happened for this guy is I find myself throughout the day being much more calm. Somewhere in there, we have this prayer that I think we said at the beginning of this meeting, this serenity prayer. Sometimes I find myself just being really at peace, that nothing's going on. Sometimes I'll get nervous because I think, when's the other shoe going to drop? I mean, that's how I have been my whole life. When things go good, I keep thinking, when is they're going to find out here pretty soon. The other shoe is coming. I'm about to get kicked off this 12th floor of this building I'm in. Suddenly the rug's going to get pulled out on me because, see, what I have is this low-grade atheism that I think now's the time that God's going to expel me. Today's the day that God's not going to allow me to do his will. Today's the day that the jig is up. Although for 63 years, the evidence is contrary to that. The evidence in my life is contrary, that God has never been anything but helpful to me when I'm willing to get in harmony with his will, when I'm willing to put aside my selfishness and dishonesty, when I'm willing to do what it calls for in step 3, that be relieved of the bondage of self. When I'm willing to do that, when I'm willing to get out of slavery to me, and I'm willing to resolutely turn my thoughts to God's will, as it talks about in step 11, that I become in harmony with that will and put me aside. What happens for me is I get this day that's relatively calm, and I'm not in that position of where, when's the other shoe going to drop? That's serenity. And I think it talks to us on page about 133, I believe it talks about us. What is the only thing that God wants for us? And that's for us to be happy, joyous, and free. It's the only thing, that's the only time it tells us in our book what God really wants for us. And I'm always amazed of how we come here with this restless, irritable, and discontentedness. And through a process of the steps, we arrive at a point where we're happy, joyous, and free. And the amazing thing that our friend Paul talks about, who we were talking about, Deb's neighbor, who we were talking about before we started this meeting, what Paul talks about is that journey from restless, irritable, discontent to happy, joyous, and free is we're just 12 steps away from that. We're just 12 steps away from coming here, what seems to be this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, this piece of this Rubik's Cube that I can't figure out. And through a process of those steps of really being able to see that really I am the problem, I'm always talk about if you're new or you're nearly new in Alcoholics Anonymous, what people have been telling us all our life is drinking is your problem, drinking is your problem. And we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and within the first few days, they tell us, drinking is not your problem. And if you're new, don't go tell your people that this guy from Oklahoma said it's not your problem. They'll hunt me down and shoot me, quite frankly. So we'll just let them live for the moment that it's the problem. But we come here and discover that drinking is just the symptom of the bigger problem, and that is, it is the only thing that works for a guy like me that abates that restless, irritable discontent, or it seems to be early on. It's the thing that abates restless, irritable discontent. My gosh, if you're restless, irritable discontent and you're seeking ease and comfort, that's totally okay to want ease and comfort if you're restless, irritable discontent. Trouble with me is I found booze early on, and that seemed to work until it didn't. Until I, had this allergic reaction and this obsession of the mind that just put me in that senseless series of sprees of obsession, spree, remorse, repeat. But today I'm free of that, and I stay free of that. I stay recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body because I've become fully engaged in 10, 11, and 12. And the piece of those two together, that 10 with the watching, those 13 non-drinking promises that are contained after that step, it talks to us about those things continue in our lives so long as we continue to do these things. It says something there and there, we get a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And a reprieve, I'm a lawyer by trade, and a reprieve is a stay of execution in my world. I mean, it's one of those things, Glenn will remember the old James Cagney movies. He'd always be in the electric chair, and they'd be just about to throw the switch on him, and it'd be about 10 seconds till midnight. And somebody would run in and say, don't throw the switch. The governor's issued a reprieve, stay of execution. And that's what a guy like me gets today. Our textbook tells us, for me, to drink is to die. I'm a real alcoholic as described in that book. To drink is to die. I get a daily stay of execution from that today. I get a stay of execution that day if I'm willing to pray, meditate, try to come into harmony with God's will. If I continue to watch for these things that our textbook talks about, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. If I'm willing to do those things, then what happens is I continue to be recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I can bring those principles, those things that you all have taught me, those things that our textbook lays out, I'm able to bring those things into my work life, into my family life, into my friendship life. And what happens is it's just not the 1 hour that I'm in an AA meeting where I am a nice guy, because I can be like in an AA meeting by the coffee bar. Hell, I'm the Dalai Lama over there. I mean, I'm just espousing platitudes, just almost reaching water walker status. I mean, if you put me in the shower, I could wear socks and they'd stay dry. I mean, I'm just spiritual. But it's the other 24 hours of the day or 23 hours a day that our textbook says it is a so much more important demonstration of those principles in our homes, occupations, and affairs. Because the founders knew, and when Wilson wrote the book, he knew we could be extremely spiritual in an AA meeting. We'll look good for each other. I know I certainly will. I mean, I'll put on my best behavior in AA. But what about the other 23 hours of my day? And those are where the rubber meets the road. And if I engage in this ardent and active practice of 10 and 11, when I get to step 12, that awakening that I've had as a result of those prior 9 steps, what happens to me is that when I engage in the world, what happens is my ability to practice the principles in all my affairs almost becomes second nature for me. And I'm not saying I got sober on day 1 and day 2. I was just, the greatest guy on earth. It was a process. It's a spiritual journey. That's why, our founders wrote in our book, it's spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. And I don't want anybody today here to think that Cliff thinks he's reached water walker status. That's not true. I've had troubles in AA. I've had problems here. I mean, I've had some difficulties in Alcoholics Anonymous. At 9 years sober, I got kicked out of my house. Not because I cheated on my wife, not because I was stealing money from the home account, nothing like that. I had reached that spiritual platitude that you couldn't tell me anything. And I quit sharing my experience, and I began to tell people what to do. I became very didactic in my approach to Alcoholics Anonymous, and quite frankly, it wasn't very attractive. And one day my wife came home and she said, I don't know you. I mean, you're physically sober, but you're not spiritually, not emotionally sober, and you got to go. And at 9 years sober, I got kicked out of my house again. And I remember going to my sponsor and saying to him, and I hope none of you ever have to do this, but maybe you have had times when you've talked to your sponsor and you've shared something with them, and the minute it came out of your mouth, think, if I change the subject, maybe they will not have heard that. I can just move on to something else, and they won't even realize I've said that. And that day I had that. And when I said it to him, it was like God took a hammer and just kind of tinged me right on the head. And what I said to him that day was this: I got to get back to basics, as if we have anything else here. And it was like God just struck me, and I thought, oh my God, nobody in Alcoholics Anonymous ascends to guru status. None of us here get to this spot where we have somehow ascended above the rest, and we'll minister to you till you can catch up, if you ever do. And what I discovered that day was I had allowed myself to become so heavenly bound that I was no earthly good. Our book talks about we keep our head in the clouds, but our feet on the ground, because that's where our fellow travelers are. And it's through that process today for me of 10, 11, and 12, what has allowed me and continues to allow me to be grounded, to continue to allow me to understand that I'm one among many, that it's continued to allow to me that I know that God has given me a message through my mess, and that I am the pipe, not the well, that God comes through me, but I am not that. The message is not mine. The message is the power that I found in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so what's happened for me from that moment, which has now been 12, 13 years ago almost, what's happened for me is I got into this daily practice. I was able to share with somebody at 9 years sober. Yeah, I don't know what meditation is, really. I don't really know. I have an idea. I have a baby elephant idea about what it is. And what that allowed me to do is get free one more time. When I'm willing to share the truth, the real truth, when I'm able to do that, what happens is God sends somebody to help me along the way. And that's been my experience on day one, and still my experience today. And why I forget that, why suddenly my ego crops up from time to time that says, you don't need to tell them that. You don't need to share that. You don't need to tell them that you're not that spiritual today. You don't need to share that with them. You don't need to tell them you're still a fallible human being. Let them believe that you're just some kind of spirit. But the truth is today is that I'm on the path with you all, and we're all shoulder to shoulder, as our book describes. And on that path, we all have an opportunity to help each other along the way. And gosh, what a great life that is today for all of us. What a great life it is today to know that none of us have to do this by ourselves, that none of us here have to trudge the road, that we walk with a purpose by ourselves. The old man told me on the very first day when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, when he sat and talked to me, he said, Clif, the first word and the first step is we. And you don't ever have to do anything in your life ever again by yourself if you don't want to. And I'm going to tell you today, I'm really grateful that I have all of you people in my life to be with me. And Glenn, I've run out of steam, man. That's all I got. And I thank you folks for listening to me today. Thank you.